Jury in Samantha Woll's murder trial has told the judge that they're deadlocked on some of the charges against the suspect, Michael Jackson Bolanos.
They deliberated for hours today and could not come to an agreement. The judge told them to keep trying before sending them home for the weekend. Joining us tonight is former prosecutor and defense attorney Rick Convertino. As always, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we thought this would be maybe somewhat quick, but here we are, deadlocked jury. Let's go over the charges first. He is charged with felony murder, first-degree murder, home invasion, and lying to law enforcement in connection to Samantha Woll's death. Any idea on what they might be deadlocked over?
Well, the major charge, the homicide, murder. I think that the judge today, Judge Van Houten, who I had a trial in front of, she's very good. She's very careful. Very judicious in her rulings. She gave the jury today what's called an Allen charge, also known by some attorneys as a hammer charge or a dynamite charge. And those pejorative terms indicate the type of instruction it is. It's based on a 1896 Supreme Court case, Allen v. United States, in which the court was allowed to instruct the jurors to keep deliberating. In effect, what it does, it tells the minority either way. If you're in the minority and you're prone to a guilty verdict, please consider the other people's decision based upon their reasoned conclusions that it's a not guilty verdict. And if you're so inclined to come back with a not guilty verdict, then consider that there are a group of you that after reason and common sense and practicality also came back with a different verdict. And is your conclusion based on reason? Is your doubt reasonable? And so that's what the jury does, or the jury instruction is. It tells them to go back, deliberate, you must be unanimous, and try again and try harder. The resources that were put into this trial are immense, the judicial resources, the law enforcement resources, the defense resources. So give it another shot and be more deliberate.
Yeah. You know, with any case, usually the defendant is going to say, not guilty, I didn't do it, even if they did. In this case, there are a lot of people who have a lot of strong and in some cases legitimate questions about him being guilty of this. If they do get this wrong, what does that mean?
If they get it wrong and come back with a guilty verdict, well, that is the travesty of the system that it happens. It happens every day all across the United States. There are people who are convicted of crimes that they did not commit. That's just the reality. There are people that are sentenced to death and have been sentenced to death in this country who have been exonerated after the sentence has been taken. So, I mean, there of course is an appeal. This is a case, you just said there are many people who believe that this case is suspect and the evidence is very weak, and I'm certainly among them. I said that the last time I was here to both of you, I think this is going to be a not guilty verdict, and I still think it will be, even after the Allen charge on Monday. I think that after a weekend of deliberation, that jurors will come back and reach the reasonable decision. It is about the weakest case that I've ever seen, certainly in a murder trial. I mean, I was telling one of the earlier anchors, Meredith, off camera, that in my early days in the Department of Justice, I worked on a task force with Robert Mueller, and there was a case where one of the prosecutors, it was all very suspect circumstantial evidence, and he said to Mueller, well, I'll just argue the hell out of it and we'll let the jury decide him. And Mr. Mueller said to all of us, he said, the most important case that a prosecutor can undertake is the one that he or she doesn't bring. And I think that with all of the evidence and lack of evidence in this case, I think it's overwhelming that this case should have never gotten to the point where it was charged, because you have so much pressure on a jury to come to a conclusion. And I just think from everything I've seen, which is most of the trial, it'd be a travesty of justice if Mr. Jackson Bolanos was convicted in this case.
So what happens in the event of a true deadlock? Even with the judge's instructions, they dig their heels in and they cannot come to a unanimous decision. Is that a hung jury, or does it just go on forever? What happens in
It's a
that
hung
case?
jury, and I had a trial in front of Judge Van Houten that was a hung jury. She'll she'll entertain the jury a little longer, and then she'll come back if they say there's an impasse, and she'll order that the jury's hung, that the trial is a mistrial, and that the prosecution will then have the ability to try it again. I hope that if that happens, the prosecution will take a step back and look at all of the errors and the gaping holes in the investigation, and and go back and maybe investigate Fuller, the ex-boyfriend who received immunity for his testimony. I mean, holy mackerel! They didn't.
And that's binding, correct? That immunity.
The immunity is use immunity. So the immunity that he was granted was for his testimony in the trial. So nothing that he says in his testimony can be used directly against him. It's not transactional immunity, which is a good point, because if they were convinced, the prosecution and the investigators were convinced that Mr. Herbstreit was not in fact guilty, or not in fact a substantial part of this case, or more of a part of the case than has been led to at this point, they would have given him transactional immunity, which had been blanket immunity for the crimes, not just his immunity for his testimony, which is unusual in this case. But they didn't test. There was a footprint, a bloody footprint that was picked up in the apartment. They didn't investigate any of his clothing or his shoes. He had a burn pit in his yard. They didn't go look for evidence in the burn pit. He had a knife. They didn't do any analysis on the knife that he had. And so there's a lot of questions here that really, are of paramount importance, life-altering, issues.
Yeah, a lot of details that seem to have been skipped.
A lot of them, yeah.
Rick Convertino, thank you for being here
Thanks.
as always.
Thanks
We
to both
appreciate
of
it.
you.